again today. Showers and thunderstorms possible. High of 61.
Your WPKY Weather Edge Weather Center forecast is brought to you by the Joshua Tree.
Liberty Mutual Insurance knows you're focusing on the road right now, so we'll just describe our new online banner ads to you. They're bright, welcoming, and clickable, with a perfectly stacked headline that reads, Liberty Mutual customizes your auto insurance so you only pay for what you need. You'll find yourself drinking in this banner ad for minutes on end and wondering about your own insurance choices.
Go to libertymutual.com for a customized quote and you could save.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Coverage is underwritten by Liberty Mutual Insurance Company and affiliates, equal housing insurer.
Indeed knows it's hard to find qualified candidates when you're hiring.
It's like finding a unicorn.
But when you post your job on Indeed, it's easy to find people with the skills you need.
Nurse practitioner, 4+ years experience, acute care certification.
Indeed has a huge pool of amazing candidates and screener tools that help you find your most qualified applicants.
Whoa, an entire short list of unicorns.
Now, get a $50 credit to give your first job posting premium placement at Indeed.com/credit. Terms, conditions, quality standards, and usage limits apply. Additional terms online.
1580, 103.3 WPKY. Good morning. Time is 8:39. You're listening to Coffee Talk. It's 43 right now. We're joined this morning by Fish and Wildlife. What is your title?
Deer and Elk Program Coordinator.
Okay, there we go. Gabe Jenkins. Good morning, Gabe.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
Doing well, thank you. How about yourself?
Doing very well for a rainy, misty morning here.
I know. It's going to be this way for a while.
Unfortunately, rain, right?
It is. Rain in the forecast. We get warmer temperatures, though, so, I guess I'll take the wet weather for the warmer temperatures.
There you go.
So, Gabe, I wanted to talk to you this morning about, I recently read an article about this chronic wasting disease. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
All right, so kind of how I like to lead into chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is it's essentially the equivalent to mad cow in cattle as it is in deer and elk. So it's a brain degenerative disease that's fatal. It's a variety of different species. It's species specific. Most folks are familiar with mad cow, at least the concept, in beef. And so essentially it's the exact same thing. Just a little bit different disease type, but it's the same behavioral thing in deer and elk. So it's a huge concern when they get it, that it will ultimately succumb to the disease. They pass it from animal to animal, and it's a pretty devastating thing.
Okay, and what are the signs? I mean, probably we're familiar with mad cow, but walk us through it.
Yeah, so essentially the signs, it really goes towards the name wasting. In the latter stages of the disease, they literally waste away to nothing. They're very, very poor in condition. A lot of times they'll salivate really bad. They'll be all over their face, and same with diarrhea. A lot of times they'll be walking in circles. Just look really poor. They lose their fear of humans, and it seems to affect their sight. So definitely you will notice that something's off with that animal. But one thing that I will say is we've not found CWD in Kentucky. However, those symptoms are also common symptoms towards other diseases that our animals have here in the state. So it's common for people to see a deer that are exhibiting those symptoms, and it's not CWD. But we always make sure that we ask our folks, if you see something acting this way, call us, because we want to come out there and collect that animal to see and to ensure that it's not CWD.
And first of all, okay, I have so many questions. First of all, where are we going to call? Let's get that out of the way. Where do we call if we see something?
So best way to get us, a variety of different ways. You can call our 800 number, which gets you to Frankfort, which is 800-858-1549. Or you can contact your local biologist or law enforcement officer to find their contact information. The best way is to get on our website at fw.ky.gov. Right on that main page, there's going to be a link that says Find My County Contact. Click that link. You input what county you live in or the county you see the deer. It will pull up all the contact people who cover those counties and give you their information, and you can reach out to them that way.
Okay. And something I found that I just recently learned, and I don't know why I didn't ever learned this before, but I didn't realize deer. So you classified this chronic wasting disease as equal to mad cow disease in cows, and I did not realize that deer were considered bovine.
They're not. I mean, they're not bovine. They're cervids, so they're a completely different lineage and species. But I guess it's the same type of disease, just with a different name.
Oh, well, I thought I recently read somewhere that they were bovine, but okay, so they're not.
No,
so I wasn't
they're
crazy.
Not bovine, no.
They're not. Okay, all right. Well, never mind. Then I don't want to talk about that anymore. They are not.
And I guess. And really, just not to get too in the weeds on it, but there's different variants of the disease. So mad cow and bovine, CWD in deer and elk. There's a human form called Crutchfield's-Jacobs disease. There's also a form in sheep called scrapie. So there's a couple different species that get it it's species specific, but that's kind of the different group or suite of diseases, all related to this type of disease.
Okay, so that brings me to ask, how does this chronic wasting disease affect humans? What does that do for us?
So, good question. We've never seen it jump the species barrier, meaning that a deer that's infected with CWD has never given CWD to humans. We've never documented that. There's been a lot of research. I will say that that did happen with mad cow, and that's the concern with it, is that back in the mid-2000s, mad cow jumped the species barrier in the United Kingdom, and humans got mad cow from eating infected beef. So the concern, what we always say is, make sure the meat is fully cooked. If you were to happen to harvest a deer with CWD in another state, deer or elk, I would recommend you discard that meat properly, and I would not eat it. I'm just not that hungry to take that risk. But I'm just, there's not documentation that it can happen, but there is an inherent risk there, and everybody has to make their own decision on what they will and will not eat, I guess. Okay,
all right. And so, and that's a little scary, because if you don't see the signs, hunters, I don't hunt, so I can't really speak with any authority on that. But if the hunter doesn't recognize the signs and they go ahead and kill that deer, and they might not even know that that's what they're getting. They're getting
correct,
with.
And that happens all over the country by hundreds of hunters every year. That's my job as the deer coordinator in this state, to ensure our herd is healthy. That's what we do as an agency. So we're monitoring our herd, collecting samples from all over the state, and that's why we're looking for it. And if we find it, we'll be sure to let people know, and then create this avenue to where we can turn the test around quickly, and so we can inform our hunters the best we can. No matter where you are in the country, it's not a food safety test. That's one thing that we tell people. It's a test that says if the animal has CWD or not. It's not a test that says, yes, this animal is safe to eat or not.
Right, okay. So, and then that brings up one of my other hundreds of questions. So it's not in this state. The way that I learned about it, again, I just learned about this recently. Mm-hmm. I read an article banning the transport of deer across state lines.
Correct.
So what states are we seeing the chronic wasting disease?
Well, especially here more recently is Tennessee. Tennessee just found it in December, right before Christmas, and they are finding it at a very alarming rate. So that would be our closest neighbor that has it. It's also fairly close to our border in Missouri. So down around Cape Girardeau is where they've found it in the wild there. All of our border states, except for the state of Indiana, has CWD. We're essentially surrounded by it right now. And so that's, as an agency, we're trying to put as many measures into place that we can to try to prevent the importation of the disease in the state.
And with them being, where in Tennessee were they found?
So it's going to be in, last I read, 3 different counties. Counties just to the east of Memphis, So Fayette, Hardeman, and I forget the third county that they found it in, but Fayette and Hardeman were the two first counties they found it.
And see,
so right on the Tennessee-Mississippi border.
So and that's the thing, with all of our border states but one being infected, it's hard to believe that the deer have respected the borders and not crossed
Correct.
over.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to guess that we probably have cases, we just haven't found them yet.
No, I don't agree with that statement, to be honest.
Okay.
It's possible it's here, but I feel like to the best of our knowledge it's not. And that's why we do what we do. We have a very targeted management approach on how we look for samples. We're not financially able to collect and sample every deer. I'd love to be able to do that, but we simply just can't. And the saving grace in all this is, yes, our border states do have it, but it's at the farthest. It's a long ways away from Kentucky. So we're out of the natural migration of a whitetail and their yearly movements.
Okay.
So,
and that was going to be my question. How far do they move in a season or year or whatever?
Where they see them or where deer make the most move are two different phases in their life. One is when they're a yearling, so at the point when mom kicks them out of the group, especially those little yearling males, mom kicks them out and they disperse looking for their own new territory. They can disperse as little as a handful of miles, and sometimes it can be 30 miles. It's kind of deer dependent. The females are usually more homebodies; they don't move as much. And then you have during the breeding season. In the breeding season, especially the bucks will like to take these little forays and venture out and then come back, but it's not a permanent move usually. So those are kind of the thoughts we think about in disease risk and movement, those two time frames. So we're still out of that normal range, and really an animal with CWD, it changes their entire behavior, and so they're not going to cycle the normal breeding season like everybody else. They're not going to make those weird movements because they're not physically able and or mentally able to process to do all those kind of things. So I can't say for certainty it's not here, but we've not found it. We're doing everything we can, and it is a good distance away from us yet, but we need to ensure as the managers of the resource to do everything we can to try to prevent it from getting in here. Right.
Okay, so is the chronic wasting disease, how do they get that? What does that come from? Is it hereditary?
So great question. It comes from a variety of different factors, and we're still learning about CWD. I mean, there's not a lot of money that goes into the research like it would on mad cow and sheep, but we know it can happen in a variety of ways. One is bodily fluids, so saliva is one. So a deer licks on one deer, they get it on their face, and then that deer licks their face. That can happen that way. It's also excreted through fecal and urine, and so if that's on the landscape, the deer could pick that up. We also know that it's actually uptaken by the plants, so a deer in theory could defecate, and then that's brought up through the roots and up to a plant. It's in that plant material, and then another deer could come along and eat that infected plant material and get it that way. And then also just the movement of carcasses, and that was we referred to that while we restricted the movement of carcasses. So if somebody brings an infected carcass in, that carcass decomposes in Kentucky, then that soil there and those plants that will come up after that carcass has been decomposed, it can uptake into the plant material, and then an animal will come along and feed on it and get positive and get the disease that way.
Wow. Okay.
So it's pretty bizarre, really, how it works.
Absolutely, because that's just like that's all over. I mean, they can easily get it. It sounds like. So, do we know how? You said there's a little research on it. Do we know how it started? Any ideas? Is it a bacteria? What is it? What?
It's not even that's. I mean, this is where it's really crazy, like Walking Dead type stuff. It's not a living thing. It's a prion protein. So all of our bodies have prion proteins in your body, like the very basic makeup of your cells. And these proteins, I mean, are sending signals. And what happens is this signal gets misfolded, and then your body doesn't know what to do with it. And so it keeps getting misfolded and misfolded and misfolded until it finally starts breaking your body down. So it's really not getting into the basics, but it's essentially if we all have prion proteins and it mutates. The disease was first documented in Colorado in the 50s. We were pretty confident it was on the landscape prior to that, but that's when they actually finally figured out what it is. It's spread all across the country since where they found it, and it's popped up. Lots of different ways the disease can move, but it's mainly from the movement of wild deer and then the movement of dead carcasses by hunters, and then also captive live deer that are moved across the country are all three forms of how the disease can spread.
That's fascinating. I mean, it's interesting to hear, because I mean, I understand the concept of, bacteria spreading, but now you're getting into an area of science that I have no knowledge of. So thank you for sharing that information. That's really neat to learn.
It's really in depth and kind of really out there. So I try to stick at the 10,000 foot level. Right. It's not this living thing that you can't just kill it. The only way you can stop it is really what we call denaturing that prion, and that's usually by some sort of chemical digester or getting it really hot for a long period of time.
Wow. Okay. So there's really no way to, or is there? Are there measures? Or what's being done to stop? To stop it from continuing? I mean, obviously, if it's been going on since the 50s, we've not accomplished that.
Well, I mean, you can't stop it. I mean, it's not something where you're going to get rid of. At least we've not found the cure yet. The biggest way is to prevent the risk factors of importing it into the state. So trying to educate our hunters about how they import harvested deer and elk back into Kentucky. So if they go somewhere else and they hunt, what they leave there and what they bring back. Also trying to restrict the movements of live deer in the captive industry, and working at it that way are really the two main things to try to educate our hunters and reduce the amount of material coming back into Kentucky from other states.
Yeah, and I can see that this is harder to manage than like with the mad cow disease. That was pretty easy to manage because there are no wild cows just running around all over the place.
Right.
So it's up to each individual to control that. But yeah, with wild animals, I could see that being a very big challenge for you.
And there's not a vaccination, so there's not, even in the perfect world scenario, we could line them all up and give them a shot. That does not exist. So everything we can do is prevention of bringing the infectious material into Kentucky. Maybe one day we figure that out. That would be fantastic, but we currently don't have that. There's also not a live animal test, so we can't take a live animal and say, hey, this animal's got it, this animal doesn't. So it's got to be a test that we perform after the animal is dead to be accurate. So kind of things that are limiting us in our knowledge and prevention.
Right, and you mentioned a vaccination, lining them all up. It would almost have to be somebody's going to have to come up with an airborne vaccination that you can just fly the airplane over all of wherever you might find a deer and spread it around.
Yeah, I mean, they actually do that with rabies. So the raccoon rabies, we don't have that in Kentucky. It's found on the East Coast, and they've actually flown planes and dropped out food that only raccoons can eat, and they get it and they eat it, and it slows the spread of raccoon rabies. So that technology is there. They're doing that now.
So whoever came up with that needs to start working on the chronic wasting disease for deer.
Absolutely, and add about 100 more people to it, and then hopefully they can figure something out.
That's right. And, we do need to wrap up, but I do want to say you mentioned that you can't live test. And I know very little about this. I do know that my daughter went to, she's a wildlife biology major at Murray State here in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
She recently went to, and I want to say it was Ohio, could be wrong, and she, participated in some of that testing, and she was kind of walking me through a little bit of the process. Tell me how you do test for that.
So essentially you need 2 forms of tissue on a deer. You need a lymph node, which is in the base of the skull. So essentially, without getting too graphic, you have to remove the head from the neck, and those lymph nodes are right there along the spine. And you collect one of those lymph nodes, and then you also collect the obex. And the obex is essentially where the spinal column forks and goes into the brain. And when you think about your brain, you have the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. That cord coming up your spinal column, and then it forks to the left and the right. Right in that area where it makes that fork is called the obex. We collect a sample there, get that obex, and then get a lymph node, and that's what we use to test for CWD.
Okay.
For deer.
Interesting. For deer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because as you mentioned, there are different types with different names for different species, correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
That's why you specified for deer.
Yes, and I guess this is, we're talking at the 10,000-foot level. If your listeners are out there and want to learn more, they can visit our website. I gave that link, and just go to you can search CWD. Another fantastic resource is CWD-info.org. And that looks at CWD all across the country. So it's got all the different rules and regulations at each state, press releases where it's been found, a really nice map where the disease is found, where I refer to most people when they call and they ask about chronic wasting disease. I send them there because it's a fantastic resource.
Excellent. Thank you for that information, because I know some hunters do go off and on these hunting trips to get their things. And we've been talking about deer this whole time, but elk are included in this as well, correct?
Absolutely. So elk, other cervid species, we'll call them, so mule deer, black-tailed deer, moose, caribou, they're all susceptible to it. So it's not just whitetail and elk, but all the kind of big game ungulate species that we have in North America.
I see. Yeah, and because I know a lot of our hunters go off to go elk hunting elsewhere. So yeah, that's good to know. Gabe, our time has run out. I sure do appreciate you joining us this morning. Been very educational. I'm glad that we got to do this, and we'll have to call you back, and we'll have to get some more information on some other things as things come up. And anything that you'd like to talk about, we'd be glad to hear about it, because I think keeping us educated is the way to go.
Well, and thanks for the opportunity, and listeners out there, if you're curious, check out those websites, be informed, and if you just want to talk, feel free to call our 800 number, and you can get to me or any of our deer biologists, and be glad to talk to you about the disease and what we're doing as an agency to try to prevent the importation of the disease.
Thank you so much, Gabe. Gabe Jenkins, say your title again.
Deer and Elk Program Coordinator.
Deer and Elk Program Coordinator. Thanks for joining us this morning.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
All
right. Serving Caldwell County since 1950. We're 1580, 103.3 WPKY Princeton.
Fox News, I'm Chris Foster. Records from President Trump's inaugural committee are subpoenaed by federal prosecutors in New York.
The Wall Street Journal reported in December